Hey fearsome friends. Tonight we have some very interesting and quite disturbing paranormal stories, two of which were written and experienced by a good friend and regular here on my channel. Love you, Brandy. So without further ado, let's sit back, relax and get cozy, comfy, warm, because it's time to let your nightmares in. Just to preface this story, I've never had any experiences like this before or since, and I would like to find some rational explanation for it all. I've not been able to at this point, and thinking about this house brings back the same helpless fear I experienced back then. I was about 16 years old when my family purchased a fixer-upper home in a relatively nice neighborhood. By no means was it a dump, but it certainly needed work. Upon moving in, we were informed the house had in the past served as a home health care facility for the elderly, and there were no strange feelings about it as such. Our family was quite excited to have a new home to start afresh, and my father and I began ripping up all of the flooring and laying new tiles throughout, also knocking out some walls and redoing the kitchen counters, etc. Next on the list was the backyard. It was basically just a dirt lot with a little porch, and on the porch was the laundry room, a tiny little shed near the back door. The first strange thing we noticed was there were multiple locks on it, but the really odd part was that the locks were on the inside of the laundry room. The door was rather heavy, and I don't believe it was wood, but it was some kind of dense material. On the inside of that door was a tiny child-sized handprint too, but not in paint or dust. It was impressed into the door, and it baffled us for a long time. One day when my brother and I had begun tearing up the yard, getting ready to seed it, he hit something hard that made a ding sound. We kept digging around until we decided to stop, because we didn't exactly want a massive hole in the yard. Then my father came out to see, and his curiosity got the better of him, and decided we would dig until we'd unearthed whatever it was. After digging a massive hole, we discovered it was an entire twin bed frame, black and rusty. In addition, we found several small plastic children's toys, many of which appeared to be partially melted. This officially gave us all the creeps. Over the next few months, strange things started to happen. Our two dogs would stand and stare down the hallway, growling and barking with their hair on end. Every time this would happen, we would all pause and watch, and it became more frequent, until they began going into my room at the end of the hall to repeat the staring, but into my closet. This was obviously unnerving, but ultimately we decided there was nothing to worry about. They were just being good boys. Sometime later, I remember waking up in the middle of the night and feeling an extremely dark, oppressive presence, like I was being watched. I sat up and looked around the room, and there was nothing. But the fear and the energy was paralyzing. I was roughly 17 years old at the time of this story, and I began sleeping with my head under the covers. Every now and then I would wake up in the middle of the night with that feeling of being watched, and the fear was so heavy I wouldn't even look above my comforter, fearing I would see something large and ominous staring back at me. I told my father about this, and although he believed me, there was nothing we could do about it. A few months later it all came to a head, when I awoke to someone shouting my name in the deepest, raspiest voice. I jumped out of my bed and flew to my door at light speed, throwing it open, to find my entire family staring back from their respective bedrooms. "Who the hell screamed my name?" I said. Everyone just stared at each other, visibly shaken, and stated they'd all heard their names screamed as well. Things intensified from there, with stuff moving or being knocked off shelves. In the movies it's always something small, only noticed by someone alone. But in our case it was always on full display for whoever was there. My brother's football team was at the house one day, and they were all in the living room eating and playing Xbox, whilst my dad was cooking, when several items on the top of our entertainment centre went flying several feet. This was not a case of the items rolling off of an uneven surface, as these were signed baseballs and footballs flying off and hitting the wall. My brother's friend took off running through the front door, and by that point my family had grown used to the strange happenings, and after standing there taking it all in, we picked up the items and went about our day. The next significant event was when my dad's friends were over, and they were all sitting on the couch. Now these were not tiny people. They were rather heavily set, and as they all sat there mid-conversation, the couch moved several inches to the left, screeching across the floor quickly. This startled me and I jumped, and I have never seen anyone move as fast as those 3 people on the couch did. You would have thought we'd had an ejector seat on there. Fast forward to when I was coming home from work in the early evening. I pulled into the carport and saw the door was wide open. I knew immediately something was off. I apprehensively peeked in and saw the back door was also open. So I walked in and immediately felt a feeling of dread as I looked around. I could see that every door, cabinet, and drawer in the kitchen was wide open. Thinking myself a tough guy, I grabbed a knife and decided to search the house whilst yelling out for my family or whatever potential intruder may be in there. When I got to the dark hallway and stared down it, I knew something wasn't right. The fear overshadowed whatever courage I thought I had, and I ran out and called my father. They were out walking the dogs, and they ran home and saw everything open. We searched the house together then, but no one was there. Things got very dark in our home from then on. Everyone was always angry and fighting. I mean, families have their issues, but this was constant, and almost unexplainably so when looking back on it. I started having these moments where it was like daydreaming, but deeper and more vivid. I couldn't hear people around me. It was like being somewhere else. Finally, one day, a girlfriend of mine was over, and I was sitting there on the edge of my bed, staring into my closet, where I had my entertainment center, and I dozed off into one of these daydreams. I saw my girlfriend take my phone and walk it into my dining room, where my family was sitting, and set it behind my dad's records to prank me. When I snapped to, I stood up casually and walked into the dining room. I moved the records and grabbed the phone, and my girlfriend and entire family stood there with their jaws on the floor. "How did you know where it was?" they asked. I started to say, "Well, I saw her put it there." But as I did, I started to realize how bizarre it sounded and began to feel freaked out, seeing them stare at me like I was a crazy person. I just walked out the door, started my car, and went out with my girlfriend. That incident had come up several times, and to this day I still don't like talking about it. It was too strange. There were many more events, but these were just the highlights. I was glad when they sold that house. Whatever the explanation for all of these things, they were creepy as hell. It happens almost every day at random times, but only when I'm alone, and it all began to become noticeable several months ago. TVs come on in different rooms when I'm in them, and I have a knee-jerk reaction to look behind me or check doorways constantly, because I'm absolutely convinced of the presence of other people around me. I get a static feeling lingering in the air and goosebumps up and down my arms. Sometimes I get tapped or poked too, and I hear things falling or being moved or opened. In the kitchen, for example. And I've even come home to my huge dresser upside down with all 3 drawers pulled out and their contents emptied. One time I had a headache and needed some ibuprofen. I was in the middle of a League of Legends grind day, and I could not find them anywhere. I got mad and turned my gaming console back on and put on my headset, when I was hit in the back of the head with an Aleve bottle. I literally laugh about this one incident all the time actually, because what the hell? Sometimes I would hear something. I have been answered with several things, and these 4 main vocal disturbances in my life has shocked me to my core. The very first one was in my childhood home. I was awoken around 4 a.m. as a young girl by hearing the voice of a young boy quietly, innocently say, "Hello?" Never again have I experienced anything quite like that until now, nor have I spoken about it. The next 3 incidents are all from the past few months, where I saw a large shadow pass over my curtain at my window, and I shouted, "Who are you?" Then a man's voice, younger but not old, maybe 30s, answered, "You can hear me?" Then he vanished. I didn't say a word. I sat in my bedroom talking to my dogs. I do this a lot. And I purchased a new book off Amazon. I was opening the box on my floor and I said, I honestly haven't read in years. I'm very excited for it. Then a woman, older, with a gravelly voice but not croaky, delicately whispered, "That's great, Charlotte." As I jumped up terrified, I heard again, "No, please, tell me more." The voice came from the hallway, so I grabbed my keys and ran out the door and left, not shaking the energy off for the entire day. Now this last experience was the most haunting one. I awoke for only the second time in my 22 years of life to someone waking me up, and this time it was to a male scream. It was lengthy and drawn out, and it came out rattling from the gut. It was extremely loud and physically audible, and it didn't feel manifested from my mind. It ripped me from the dream I was coherently having and remembering at the time, and it had absolutely nothing to do with it either. It was a dream in the universe of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, one of my favorite movies. The directional sound waves came from underneath me actually, almost as if rising from beneath my pillow upwards, through my body and towards the ceiling. Now since this last incident, there are some things that have started happening. My brand new phone loses full charge in 2 hours, maybe less. There are suddenly more pests, bugs, mainly flies and gnats, and this has never been an issue before in my 4 years of living alone in this place. I'm having bad sleep paralysis at night, and I've developed a strange paranoia of open doorways. All doors must be shut. Things go missing from the spot where I set them down, and then later reappear only after I get far, far too frustrated. I also feel a weird sense of protection from both my dogs. I keep them both in the same room with me for the day, which is in the basement, to closely monitor any sounds and to make sure they are not coming from upstairs or from them messing about on their own. One of my dogs is severely disabled, and I don't know why, but I feel protection radiating from her. Perhaps it's because she has the most beautiful soul of an animal, and I'm convinced that any paranormal activity stays outside of any room she's in. This is also the reason that I know for sure that if I see something that's been destroyed, it's kind of hard to blame a paralyzed dog for it. I have a Ouija board that I've used once, but I otherwise purchased it because it was an original from 1963, or around then, and was from a private seller at an auction. I purchased it 3 years ago and never had any problems, so I don't think it's related. These experiences have all manifested from early this year, and I never believed in the paranormal until now. I have so much more to say, but my ADHD makes me feel like I'm not saying what I need to get answers. So if any nice person wanting to help hears this and has any questions, asking them would really help me so I can get to the bottom of this. So I currently live in the United States, and once I was out of college, I took a job in Australia on a horse farm. I was 21 at the time, and this was my first official job. I loved it. When I arrived, I moved into the original home on the property, which was smack dab in the middle of 400 acres, close by to the main house and the barns, but fenced in with considerable privacy, so no one bothered us. During my time there, we had an influx of seasonal workers coming and going, and the owner travelled frequently to other farms and overseas. So much of the time I would be left alone on the property in the evenings. The house itself was a moderate-sized rancher with 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a laundry room. We mainly used the back sliding glass door to come and go from the house, and from the day I moved in, the sliding glass door rollers were broken. It was old and heavy glass, and you had to lift it and push hard to open it. But the back entrance went to the garden, had nice views, and it's where we frequented for tea breaks. As soon as I moved in, I immediately got feelings of being watched, but I wasn't hearing anything at this point. A few weeks after the move, I had an almost lucid dream. I was laying in bed when I looked up, and at the foot of my bed stood a woman in a full-length dress of purple lace with a high neck and sleeves. It looked to be from the 1890s, and the woman looked middle-aged, around 40s to 50s. Her hair was pinned up in a bun on top, and the only way I knew she was upset by my presence was the look on her face. She looked like she wanted me out. She didn't say anything, didn't move. She just stood there staring, when I suddenly woke up and she was gone. I had this same dream many times whilst living there, and the only thing that changed was her face. It seemed to soften the longer I was there, but occasionally she'd look angry or upset. After a time, I believed that she'd resided in the home with us and was just always there. She didn't seem to do much around the house, other than watch and show up in dreams. She actually has little to do with this story, other than to give context to what I believed was in the house up until this point. So let's fast forward to 5 months later, where all my previous housemates had left and it was just me in the house. I'd had a nice day at work on the farm. It was a busy and bustling day, and lots of people were on the property. It was winter in Australia, if you want to call it that, so the days were a bit shorter. I climbed into bed around 8 p.m, which is the norm for me, and I usually just sit with my laptop and play games, browse the web or make calls home to family in the US. I'd been in bed for about an hour just relaxing, and it was now dark out, when suddenly I heard the sliding glass door push open and someone took 4 heavy steps into the house. It sounded like whoever it was wearing heavy work boots, and it shook the house. Everything suddenly went quiet, and I freaked. I jumped up and grabbed whatever I could find, which happened to be an old heavy shot glass. We didn't have a lot of cups, and I'm not a big drinker. It's just what we had. And I also grabbed my alarm clock, which was one of those old ringing ones with the hammers between the bells. I guess I figured I'd throw stuff at the intruder, as no one had ever entered the house without a knock or at least a call-out. After a few minutes of getting my nerve up, I entered the hallway and walked into the kitchen, but no one was there. No person, no boots, and the sliding glass door was closed. But I never heard it close, only open. I opened the sliding glass door and called out, grabbing a flashlight and beaming it around, looking for anyone. I was panicked and looking for answers, so I desperately called the farm manager to see if he had stopped by. He answered and was panicking too. I asked if he had been there though, and he said no. He said that maybe the owner had stopped by looking for me. But he corrected me, saying that the owner was with him, and they had been 2 hours away at the races. There should have been no one else on the property. At this point I was very unnerved and spent the next 4 hours calling family overseas, as I was unable to sleep. Many weeks after this, I ran into one of the farm hands who had left prior to the event. He mentioned he hadn't had a real bed whilst he stayed at the house, and we kind of laughed about it, saying he should have asked for a bed frame or something. He slept with the mattress on the floor. The room he stayed in was right off the kitchen and directly across from the sliding glass doors, and we somehow then got onto the topic of the kitchen light being left on at night. I was always first to bed, so I never turned it off, and even after everyone had left, I just continued to leave it on, not thinking about it. Well, at least not consciously. He mentioned he never turned it off either, and in fact would always turn it on before heading to bed if it wasn't already. When I asked why, he said it was because he often heard footsteps in the kitchen, and he could see a light under his bedroom door, wanting to see if anyone was there. He never saw shadows or anyone else for that matter. This happened quite a few months back over this past winter. I was outside with my son and our 3 dogs had followed us. My husband wasn't home at the time, and this will become relevant as the story progresses. So we were all out on the back porch, my son and I sitting and the dogs laying in the sun. And my son was pointing at things and I'd tell him about whatever he was pointing at. I don't know how much he took from it back then, but he still likes when I tell him about things now. A sound then suddenly made us all jump, the dogs included, and they lifted their heads and looked in the direction it had come from. It was the doorknob to the door that led out to the back porch. I thought that maybe I had somehow missed my husband coming up the driveway, and it was him about to come out and see us. But then it just stopped. It sounded like someone had tried to turn the doorknob and then let go. I got up, looked through the diamond-shaped window in the door, and lo and behold, there was nothing there. I picked my son up and went round to the front of the house, and my husband wasn't home yet either. Luckily, my husband made it home just a minute later, and he went through the house, but didn't find anything, though I didn't expect him to. So I recently tried to visit my childhood home in Vacaville, California. I used to live in a house down a long dirt road that was pretty secluded, other than one smaller house at the back of us. I lived there from 1995 to 2002 and was 6 years old when we moved there. I lived there with my older sister, mother and grandmother, and the home behind ours had a couple living there called Pee-wee and Kelly, who were about 45 to 50 years old. The street we lived on was called Davis Street, and upon my recent visit, I've learned the houses were torn down and a freeway now stands there. It breaks my heart to know my past home is gone, but it's also a relief, and you will learn why in a moment. According to my uncle that stayed in Vacaville after I'd moved away, no one else had moved into our old house. My middle school was a Paddon Elementary, which is still there, and we were poor, so couldn't afford a car, which meant I had to walk to school every day. Another thing to mention here is that we were Jehovah's Witnesses. I never understood the religion, and I think it had something to do with all the crazy spiritual stuff that happened, although they weren't spirits wreaking havoc in our home. They were demons. My father left us when we were young, so just me and my 3 other family members occupied the home for those 7 years. And the creepy thing about these scary occurrences is that they only seem to happen to me. My grandma and my mum wouldn't see or hear anything at all, and nor did my sister. My mum was mentally disabled and would have severe seizures, so I didn't expect her to understand me anyway, so I never told her anything. But when I would tell my grandma I'd seen and heard things, she would tell me some stories of her own. I remember one Thursday night when I came home from Bible study at my uncle's house. We'd learned a lesson about supposed pagan holidays. I asked my grandma why we didn't celebrate birthdays, Christmas and Easter, etc., and she would tell me they were the devil's work. I was young and didn't question it, and she would tell me to always pray to Jehovah, and he would keep me safe from these paranormal situations I would be in. One night, while my sister and I were in the living room with my grandma, she told me stories about a friend of hers. She was reading the Bible in her bedroom and had boxes in the hallway, having just moved in, when she heard whispers coming from the hallway. She immediately started reading verses from the Bible and stating Jehovah's name. According to her, invisible forces started knocking over the boxes, fleeing from the words she was yelling from the Bible. A few weeks later, after moving into the home, my grandma told me that her friend was severely injured. She was in the kitchen cooking spaghetti for dinner, and she had boiled noodles in a pot on the stove. Taking the pot with the noodles and turning to carry them to the sink to drain, She said she was met with some kind of force, and the boiling pot of water was pushed onto her upper body, which caused severe burns. I'm not sure if these stories were true, and I can't vouch for them, even though she seemed serious about it. But I can definitely vouch for my own stories. Most of these scary occurrences that happened to me involved my room, my mother's room, and just a few times in our living room. I hated staying in my room alone at night, because I was always afraid that I would see or hear something that I would dread. I always kept a nightlight on in my room, no matter what, and I would keep my door open as well, and made sure it was never closed at night. Often my grandma would get up during the middle of the night to use the bathroom, which was located right across from my bedroom and down the hall. I would hear her shuffling to the bathroom and turn on the light, which would shine into my room, which was comforting for me, although one night that comfort went out the door. I was lying on my bed, which was in the corner of my room and facing my black dresser, which had a dozen Dragon Ball Z models on it that I'd built, when I heard my grandma shuffling into the bathroom. Upon her turning on the light, I opened my eyes, and to my dismay, the shadows of the figurines casted by the flooding light had faces, and these faces were staring straight at me angrily. A rush of cold fear just washed over me, and when my grandma closed the door to the bathroom, the shadow faces faded just seconds after appearing. I couldn't yell or scream, but I ran out of that room quickly and waited for my grandma in the living room where she slept on our couch. Till this day I remember those eerie, angry faces, and I remember thinking that there is no way a ghost could do that. This occurrence was one of the first to happen out of many more, and I have no doubt we had demons in that house. After moving, I never experienced another paranormal occurrence again. It's been 19 years. I spent a year or so living with my brother in a very old house that a doctor used to own and worked out of, and we are both certain it was haunted. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, nothing too extreme happened, but there were a couple of notable strange things that come to mind. The house was 2-story, and we were just renting out the bottom floor, whilst the top was empty. And one night, my brother and I were sitting downstairs talking, when all of a sudden we heard the fire alarm upstairs going off. We had already eaten dinner long before, so there was nothing that would have made it go off. We both went up to investigate and turn it off, and as we got upstairs, we saw a light turning itself on and off. It did have a dimmer switch, so that may have been malfunctioning, but we both got a very uneasy feeling, switched both things off and went back downstairs. Nothing else happened that night. Being in that house, you would always have a weird feeling, especially when alone. There was a crow that would come and peck at the windows whilst it just stared at you, and even when the blinds were closed it would peck. It wouldn't startle away and would follow you around the house, pecking quite hard at the window you were closest to. You'd hear what sounded like thudding and banging, or maybe loud footsteps upstairs almost every night, which could be the heat from the day leaving the floorboards and causing them to move slightly. But the floor up there was carpeted. It was probably floorboards underneath it, though. A girl I was seeing lived there for a little while with us too, and my brother and I would go to the gym in the afternoon, into the night, and come home to her nearly in hysterics, or just sitting on the driveway because she was too scared to stay in the house. My brother lived there longer than me, and has said he's heard banging or weird noises all the time. His bedroom was the doctor's old office, surgery, or whatever it's called, and he'd say he felt like he was being watched when he was trying to sleep, or he'd have a sense of unease. I believe the owner said the doctor had died in the house, and I'm sure there's more to it, but I can't remember right now. Does anyone have any ideas what these things could have been? This happened around 13 years ago near Elizabeth Lake in California. My kids and I were looking to buy a house, and there wasn't a lot in my price range, but in those days we just wanted a place to call our home. I remember that it was a sunny day, but it wasn't too hot, so we got any new listing that the realtor had, and off we went. We had such high hopes. Everything was going well, and we found a few hopefuls. But for some reason, when it came down to the last house that was located on a hill, the realtor told us that she wouldn't be going up there with us. I asked her then how we would be getting into the house, and she told me for some reason that there was no point in her coming, as nobody ever locked it. I didn't understand exactly what she meant by that, and we all thought she'd started acting strangely at the end there. But after looking at the pictures of the place, we were excited to go look at it. The directions were simple. Go up this winding road, passing 2 houses on the right, and up at the very top of the hill, overlooking an old, unused road, stood a large, white, 2-story house with black trim. It looked a bit tired, and the yard was somewhat overgrown. But we pulled into the driveway and sat there for a minute, staring at the bright red front door. The house didn't look scary at first. All we saw was potential. So I went up to the door with my kids behind me, anxiously waiting to go exploring. You would think from our history with the paranormal that I would have felt something the second I touched the door handle, but I didn't. As you walked in, you were met by a staircase that went up to a landing where it turned left, and then they turned into open carpeted stairs that went up to the kitchen and living room on the 2nd floor. To the left was a door to the garage, and to the right was a bedroom, with then 3 more bedrooms joined by a long hallway that went straight back, and a bathroom at the very end. I decided to look in the garage first to check the foundations and pipes, and that's when my daughter Ginny saw a little cross on the windowsill. Then she noticed another one on the other window. But not thinking anything of it, she asked if she could keep them so she could make some earrings. I didn't see why not. After all, they'd been left behind. As I started up the open stairs, I began to feel dizzy, as if my world was upside down, and I almost fell over. I grabbed the rail and sat down on the top step. Then my son Cody came barreling up the stairs and stopped halfway up, putting his hand on his throat while making a face. Then he ran up the rest of the staircase. I was feeling better, so I looked around the house some more with them. There were large windows everywhere, and a door that opened to a balcony overlooking the cliff part of the back of the house, where we stood for a bit taking in the beauty. But all of us got an uneasy feeling then, so we went in to further check the place out. Cody was looking out the windows in the living room where he kept picking things up and yelling at his sister that he'd found another one. My daughter started down the stairs and lost her footing. I remember saying that if we moved into the place we would have to put in another handrail. I then looked at the bedroom in the front, thinking that would be my room. But as we walked back, the darker and cooler the rooms became, which I mentioned would be great in the summer. I was looking in the bathroom when I got this cold chill go up my spine and my hair raised up. It was an undoubtable feeling that I had had many times before. Then at that moment, I heard a breath next to me, and I knew that if I looked, I might see something. So I turned my head, deflecting my eyes with my hand, as I passed by the mirror and walked out. That's when my older son, who was in the back bedroom, pointed out that there was a cross over the window and door to the room. Cody then pulled some of the same small crosses out of his pocket, and said that he thought Ginny wanted them, so he had been picking them up for her. I ran to the cross that was over the window, then to the door, and told them that these crosses were different than the ones in his pocket. These were painted over, and were meant to stay where they were. At that point we were freaking out, as we'd seen that over every opening, every window, on both sides of every doorway, there was a cross. Ginny made a good point at that moment by saying that as much as we wanted to all run away, we had to put all the crosses back where we'd found them. So we went together from room to room and put every one of them that they'd taken back. Then we started out the front door. Ginny and I were the last to step out of the house when Ginny said, "Wow, it's so much warmer outside." And then I got pushed from the back, almost making me run into her. I asked the realtor why she would even show us that house, but apparently she had never even been in there herself, and you can bet, after hearing what we had to say, she never did. We were talking about it later, and we all came up with the same conclusion, that the house must have seen a lot of evil. We wondered how long they were tormented before they realized that whatever was there must have been too strong for their faith. How bad does it have to be before you throw in the towel? They must have been really frightened for the owner to have painted over so many crosses. My daughter Ginny passed away recently, so life was put on hold for a bit to allow us to heal. She was the type of person that made everyone feel happy and alive, and she made watching paint dry so much fun. I've been trying to wrap my head around things and make some sense out of the circumstances, but I haven't been able to. I was already raising her 2 children until she got on her feet, and after 8 months she was 3 days from coming home. But now that day will never come. A little over a week after she passed, I had a dream she was there. She was wearing her ripped jeans and scuffed up black and white Converse that she had propped on the bench that she was kicking back on like nothing had ever happened. The moment I saw her, I jumped up and ran over, taking her little hands in mine, and I could smell her hair as I was stroking it. She liked to make things with her hands, so they were soft, but her fingertips were a little rough, and I felt them. It was all so real. Ginny, oh my God, please listen to me. Listen to me. I was frantically telling her that she was gone. I can't tell you how intense this was. I was so desperate for her to believe me that it scared us both. I told her how she died, and she looked as if she was trying to remember. Then it was like a light had gone on in her head, and it clicked on how it might have happened. At that moment, a faded image of her brother standing in the background, cupping his face crying, appeared at a glance, and I saw fear in her eyes. She shook her head no and gave off a vibration that this was a mistake, and she never thought that this could have happened. It looked like she'd finally realized that she was no longer living. She asked me why I was telling her this now, because it was too late. But mind you, this was a dream. I told her that if there was a chance, maybe in a parallel or alternate time or dimension, then maybe you would have listened to me and not made the decision that killed you. I said that maybe if you believe me, I will wake up in that time or dimension, and you will be walking through my front door telling me that you love me, and all this pain really would be a bad dream. I woke up crying and heard my grandson's voice, who was lying on the bed next to me. He asked if I was crying about his mum, and I told him that I had just had a bad dream, and that I was sorry for crying. He's autistic, so it was hard for him to comprehend at first. He sat up and stroked my face, wiping my tears, and said, "Mum said she is sorry. She said to trust her because that man did it." My grandson was telling me this like he was just passing on a message, and it all made sense. The day went on and my son could definitely see that there was something more to me that day, so I told him about my dream. As I was telling him though, I noticed the blood drain from his face, so I asked him what was wrong. He just then remembered that 6 years ago, Ginny came to him with a, as she put it, really trippy and scary dream about Mom. She told him that I was acting crazy, trying to convince her not to do something because it killed her, so she had to change things or she would die. She told him that it really shook her up, because Mum, me, was so frantic and desperate for her to believe her that she was dead. She told him that it was so real that it scared her. I remember her telling me something, but she didn't go into details. She just said that she was sorry for whatever it was she'd done in her dream. I remember laughing and telling her that maybe it was a sign not to do whatever it was she had done. My son and I are at a loss for words on this, and I'm so confused. Is there an alternate or parallel universe? Are there different times and dimensions? Did she ever heed my warning, and did I save her in another dimension? If so, how many times? It was so real for both of us 6 years apart. Why didn't she listen to me in this life and time? I know it was just a dream, but it was so real. I feel blessed to have heard her voice tell me that she loved me, and that she is sorry. My son felt her hugs and saw her smiling at him in the workshop, and I hear my grandson sometimes talk to her in the other room, and it fills my heart. Her daughter texts her, trying to pretend there is some sort of normality. She said that everyone mourns in their own way, and the one thing she misses the most is hearing her mother say her name. I think she is wise beyond her age. For my granddaughter's peace, I hope her mother visits her someday. So I'm kind of freaking out, and I'm looking for either reassurance that this isn't paranormal, or advice on how to protect myself if it is. I moved to a new apartment back in March. It's not super old, but not super new either, and as far as I know, nothing bad has happened here. For the first couple of weeks, nothing happened. I had some nightmares and trouble sleeping, but I chalked it up to the move. We did move here from another country, so there was plenty of stress that could have caused a restless night. Then about a month in, I saw something. You know that part of sleep when you're kind of in between being asleep and awake? Things are a little fuzzy, reality starts to shift a bit, and your brain has some weird thoughts like, I need to remember to eat the soap tomorrow, or something like that. Well, during that part of sleep, I saw a dark figure at the far end of the room. I couldn't make out any features, but I knew it was looking at me. I instantly woke up, and woke my husband up too, but the figure was gone, so I just attributed it to stress nightmares again. A couple of months later, still during that in-between state, I saw something crawling on the floor between the wall and my side of the bed. Our bed is pushed almost up against the wall on my side, with only a small slither of the floor showing, so there's not enough room for anyone to walk or stand there or anything. But I saw something that looked to be the size of a teenage girl, just crawling like a bug on the floor. Again I woke my husband up, but there was nothing there. By this point, the stress nightmares should have gone away, so I'm starting to freak out. Still another couple of months later, once again during that in-between state, I saw this horrible witch-like figure rising up from the floor on my side of the bed. She had this long dark hair, glowing yellow eyes and sharp teeth. Her hands were gripping the mattress, and she was just slowly rising up, glaring at me with such hatred. I've never seen anyone look at me that way, and I can still see it when I think about it, and it just churns my stomach. At that point, I was starting to think I should post here for advice, but I was afraid to write about it in the apartment, and there wasn't anywhere else I could go, so I just didn't. But last night, I decided I needed help. I was fully asleep and mid-dream when this happened. I don't remember my dream. It was unrelated to whatever was happening. But suddenly I started hearing screaming. I realized that it was me, and my husband was waking me up because I was screaming in my sleep. As I was coming back to consciousness, I could feel a literal hand on my ankle, and as soon as I was fully awake, the hand just vanished. Not pulled away, just disappeared. But for the next 3 hours, I could still feel a warmth on my ankle where it had been. No matter how I moved, I could still feel it. Now I know this isn't sleep paralysis. I've had that before, and this is nothing like it. I can move, I can wake up, and I don't see scary things in the corner of the room, other than these specific things. I'm also not sure why this is only happening when I'm asleep, or almost asleep. Nothing else in the apartment is haunted. No shadows, no movement, no voices, etc. And we do have a long dark hallway that sketches me out whenever I walk past it. But I'm pretty sure that's just me being freaked out by the dark. Also, I'm not sure if this is relevant, But the people who lived here before us moved out before their lease was up, and they even paid for our first month of rent so we could move in. At first I thought it was just because they were nice, but now I'm starting to wonder if they were just that desperate to leave. I still have their contact info, so I'm thinking about texting them, but I really don't want them to think I'm crazy, as we aren't exactly friends. I also haven't told my husband about this. He doesn't believe in this stuff, and brushes me off when I talk about other paranormal things. Does anyone have any advice? I'm really freaked out and I don't know what to do. Me and my 2 dogs and my now fiancé drove a long way to get to our campsite in the Ozarks, Bark Shared Recreational Area to be exact, and it is west of Mountain View, Arkansas. We drove all day, on Wednesday, May 19th, to get to our campsite and set up by dark. We were completely alone at the campground, and it's midweek, and the week before Memorial Day. And the camp we chose is a recreational area, which means there are no electric hookups, water or bathrooms, and definitely no camp staff. As we were setting up, I could hear this bass-like rhythmic noise that I only noticed in my subconscious. I don't know why, but I was feeling like something was wrong. He and I carried on setting up our otherwise perfect campsite, until I noticed both our dogs were staring across the small mountain river and into the forest beyond it. I asked myself, haven't I been hearing this strange noise coming from that direction? And now they hear it too. I asked my boyfriend to stop rattling tent stakes and lend his ear to whatever this noise was. He heard it, and the dogs were even more alerted to it now, since all the other noises, including literally all of the bugs, frogs and birds, not to mention our own unpacking noises, and us chatting, had ceased. At first we wrote it off as being some new mountain noise that we just weren't accustomed to. We live in a relatively flat region of the country, and my boyfriend said it could have been the rocks settling. I didn't think that was quite right, but I wasn't about to go investigate at dusk in bear country before camp was set up. As we were putting in the final touches like rugs and some solar string lights for the nights to come, the noise had gotten louder. I would say they were almost more comprehensible, as they weren't just a bassy noise anymore. The noise had bass, but it wasn't just bass. It almost articulated, like it was making nonsensical syllables, then pausing, then making more. It got closer and closer, like it was coming towards the edge of the small river opposite us, and I swear on everything I love that it was talking some strange static. Like you were stopped by a car with busted speakers at a stoplight, and they were blaring gothic trap music, but just the talking part, and with your windows up. No music, just loud, muffled, mumbling and static. I had a hard time not telling my boyfriend that we should just go, as we'd both heard it as well as the dogs. But it quickly got farther, and then went away almost completely. So we decided to zip ourselves up in the tent and try to sleep. I woke up many times during that first night to my female dog trembling and growling, and when I strained and listened, I could hear that same muffled bass noise in the distance once again. I did manage to sleep a few hours eventually that first night, and morning thankfully came before the noise could get any closer. The following 3 nights were completely normal and were filled with sounds of tree frogs, bullfrogs, whippoorwills, cicadas and owls, just like you'd imagine from the mountains at night. On Friday night we had a couple of neighbours camping with us, and even more on Saturday. My boyfriend also proposed in the middle of a shallow river on our big 18-mile hike, and of course I said yes. Other than that strange, ominous noise that accompanied us on our first night, it was the best trip I could have ever asked for. I'm just wondering if anyone here might have a rational answer as to what it was. The law of conservation states that energy cannot be created or destroyed. I submit to you that the presence of an electrical current within the body also has to follow the law of conservation, in that it cannot be created or destroyed. In fact, it has been present since the beginning of time, or even past that, and will always be present, never ending. We have enough understanding about this energy to know there is a positive, a negative, and a neutral. Consider for a moment this energy exists in and out of our dimension. We will call it dimensional wide energy. In this theory, this energy exists and affects us, but not on a level that can harm, be seen, and barely measurable. But if you could see it outside of its normal environment, the form, colour, size, and measurement would vary depending on the development, which is a result of knowledge gained in our dimension, and the type and size of the power output, more positive than negative output as an example. This is the actual spirit each of us has, evident by the visual aura we put out. Think of our bodies as a battery, storing energy constantly until our demise, when there is a release of that energy. That energy is then passed on to another, or even multiple bodies. Also think of our bodies as a kind of antenna, receiving and transmitting energy back and forth throughout our lives, but always maintaining the same level, never dropping below the highest level produced in each other. To do so is to start the process of our bodies breaking down and passing away. In storing of the energy within ourselves, we have the ability to store the three types separate from each other. Those levels can fluctuate up and down considerably, which means you can at any given time have more stored up negative, positive, or neutral dimensional wide energy at any given time. And the one stored up the most directly affects our personalities at that time. For example, if you have more positive energy stored up in your body, it creates positive thinking or makes you do good things. Also, we transmit the positive energy to others around us. We can even submit emotions and are a basis to prove the types of energies we have stored up the most. The negative being anger, sadness, and despair. Positive being happiness, love, and peacefulness. Neutral being calm or absence of any emotion. That in this theory is the essence of the energy stored. The energy directly relates to our emotions, in which transmits to others the energy we have stored. Death comes to all of us, but this energy has to abide by the law of conservation. So what happens to it? Electricity has this built-in desire to reach the ground. Consider the law of gravity. Even though there is no measurable mass or weight to electricity, doesn't mean it doesn't have one. I submit that in fact it does. By applying the law of gravity, we must assume when this energy leaves our body, it goes to the ground. Consider the Earth as one big recycling machine. We see this over and over, where the Earth uses anything that has died to produce new life. I propose the same can be said of the dimensional wide energy. The Earth takes this energy and uses it to create new life. So where does the afterlife fit into all of this? Eventually all life on Earth will end. This energy will still be present though. This is where the dimensional wide part of the theory comes in. Consider for a moment three separate dimensions all existing within each other. A dimension of positive energy, dimension of negative energy, and the dimension of neutral energy. We live in the neutral dimension, therefore all life starts with neutral energy. It exists as neither a good or a bad life. We choose which energy we want to absorb the most, and when we pass, these energies separate into its respective dimension, heaven being the realm of positive energy, hell being the realm of negative energy. The reason these dimensions exist is because one cannot exist without the other. Just like in electronic devices, you need a positive and a negative output for it to work, with neutral being what the energy transfers back and forth. In a way, we can say when we die, we go to heaven and hell and stay right there. We may even be able to explain things paranormal with this theory. Ghosts, seeing the future, recalling a past life. It may all be a direct example of this antenna we have, and being able to tap a specific wavelength of specific energy to be able to do these things. Even the visual manifestation of a ghost could be sort of a short circuit of the wiring. Whether this is all true or not, it makes for a compelling story and something to debate. No matter what religious beliefs you may hold, there is one enviable truth we almost acknowledge: that there is a presence of an electrical current within our bodies, and that energy has to come and go somewhere. Whatever the truth may be, that much is certain. So I was recently watching the Cult of 35 True Myths One Lie podcast. It's basically a podcast by Cult of 35 where he covers 3 horror stories, and one of them is fake. The guests have to figure out which one is fake, and the winner gets pizza or ice cream. So I was watching the Shadow People Hate Single People episode of it, and it reminded me of an event that happened to me years ago. So here it is. I was about 7 years old at the time, and I had moved into a new house with my parents. It was just the 3 of us, as I was an only child, and we normally lived in flats. So we had pretty much moved once every 2 years, sometimes a year, but very rarely. Our new place was pretty big with 2 floors, and both were massive. Not like a mansion by any means. My aunt lives in a mansion, so I know what a mansion is, but the new house is still very big. The first floor consisted of a big living room, a kitchen on the side, and the upstairs had bedrooms, guest rooms, and a smaller living room. I'm sure there were multiple other rooms in the house though, but that I can't remember. The day we were moving in, my uncle, aunt, and my 2 cousins were there to help. One cousin is female and years older than me, and the other is a male and older than both of us. That day I found a big box that I could fit in, so I got in and started flopping around in it, trying the best I could to not lose my balance. But somehow I did and fell against the edge of a wall, hitting my head quite hard. I was pretty hurt and burst into tears, and my dad instantly came home to take me to the local hospital with my mum. It wasn't too serious, but still needed to be treated. And when we got to the surgery room, I got my injection, so I felt pretty numb to the pain, and the doctors were calming me down as they stitched my head and cleaned it up. I ended up being fine in the end, and got excused from school for a few weeks. My many family members used to visit our house a lot, sometimes even stay over. But no one but me and my parents lived there. Suddenly my whole family got sick with the flu one day, like everyone who would visit suddenly in the span of almost 3 days. My dad also got sudden anxiety and would randomly get panic attacks, and these were really bad panic attacks. Then one day, my mum was dropped off at home by her co-worker, but while opening the gate, she tripped and broke her ankle. Luckily, her co-worker brought her in, but she was stuck in a wheelchair for months afterwards. Then the main event happened. Now my family are super religious Muslims, so I'm not sure if I believe in ghosts, but I do believe in demons or other entities as such, and all of these events weren't random, and I believe they all happened for a reason. So one day, yes, it was actually daytime, I was on my iPad in the downstairs living room with a lot of my family members when my iPad suddenly died. My charger was upstairs, so I got up to get it, but suddenly had this extremely bad feeling in my gut. It was telling me to not go upstairs alone. So I turned around and asked if someone could go upstairs with me, but everyone just encouraged me to go up by myself, so I did. I made my way up extremely slowly, and once I'd got there I suddenly stopped. It felt like everything around me had gone completely dark, and I suddenly felt extremely cold. I slowly looked to my right, only to see a silhouette of a tall man all the way up to the ceiling of the room he was in, but I could see no features on him, not even the reflection of light on him. It looked like he was made of completely void black, to the point nothing could reflect off of him. I froze for a few seconds before turning around and running down the stairs to my family. "There's a man upstairs," I said. My older male cousin then got up and ran upstairs with me, and my jaw dropped when I saw that the man was no longer there. A lot of my other family members and my parents ran around the house, looking all over for this man, but they couldn't find a thing. They eventually came to the conclusion that I had seen a demon, and not too long after this we moved out into another flat and never experienced anything like it again. I'm glad that nothing worse happened at that house. A very religious Christian family lives there now. But what happened is something I can't forget. Now, I have had many experiences with shadow people, and all of them were after I'd moved from New York to where I live now, which is in Arkansas, which is where I met my husband, who I will also tell a story about, as he has many as well. The first one was when I was at my best friend's house when we were in high school. We had been the only two there, but we thought we'd heard something coming from the hallway, and I thought I may have seen a shadow. Being that I'm small and do not look nearly as old as I actually am, I keep a pocket knife on me, legally sized, just in case I ever needed to protect myself. Also being the mum friend and an apparent psychopath with no self-preservation instinct whatsoever, I told my friend to stay in the kitchen, grabbed my knife, and proceeded to clear all the rooms. I never found anyone or anything, but I'm wondering if it was a shadow person, whatever they are. The next two were definitely shadow beings, and you'll understand why I say beings in a minute. I've seen a lot of shadow people, though not all of them were black. I saw a red one time or two, one of which was a small animal, some kind of rodent I think, that flashed by too quickly for me to identify. That's why I say beings, because not all of them appear in human form. The following two occurrences were both with shadows shaped as animals, though they were the typical black colour. The first one was when I was a teenager. By this time I think I was in mid-late teens, 17-ish. However old I was pretty used to paranormal stuff just kind of happening, so I didn't get bothered by it much. And I was sitting on the bottom edge of my bed, texting the same friend from the first part of this story. I suddenly felt a whoosh of air shoot past my head, enough that my hair actually moved. It was a shadow crow that flew over my shoulder and disappeared into my floor. This next one involves my mother. We had worked at the same counselling centre for a while, so we'd carpool to work. I can't remember if this was already after I'd met my husband and gotten pregnant, so I can't recall exactly how long ago it was. But we were almost at work, and I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I swear it looked like a black bear cub had melded into a door on the local theatre. The local theatre that is said to be haunted by literally everyone. I was part of the theatre programme when I was younger, and we had a lock-in for a night, and I saw shadow people. My eyes grew wide, and when I looked over at my mum, she said, "You saw that too?" We actually stopped for a minute and tried to puzzle it out, in case it could have been anything else. But there's nothing else it could have been. The theatre doors were locked, and no one was inside. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed my video. And if you did, could you please give me virtual hugs by subscribing and clicking that notifications button. I also have a Patreon page and YouTube channel membership if you'd like to support me further. Thank you again for being here. Keep being creepy.